What I did after discovering a family secret. I always believed my childhood was strict because my parents were old-fashioned. No sleepovers, no unlocked doors, no photos of me before age 3. Whenever I asked about it, they'd change the subject. I assumed they were just private people. Until one evening, I learned the truth they had spent decades hiding. My father asked me to grab a document from his office cabinet. The drawer jammed halfway, so I pulled harder, and the false back panel came loose. Behind it was a locked notebook. I hesitated, but something about it felt forbidden. I found the key taped under the desk. Inside were detailed logs, dates, locations, surveillance photos, photos of me as a child, at parks, at school, sleeping, crying. Every memory I didn't remember. They had recorded. My stomach twisted. I kept flipping pages, and then I found something worse. Photos of other children, labeled, categorized, ages, physical descriptions. Some pages had big red X's across their faces. Some didn't. My hands went cold. I heard footsteps approaching. I quickly closed the book but kept it in my hands. When my father entered the room, his smile dropped. He knew. He didn't ask how much I saw, he just said, "It's not what you think." But his voice cracked. I backed away, shaking my head. He tried to reach for me. I told him if he moved another step, I'd scream. My mother entered next. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She looked resigned. She said, "We were supposed to protect you from this." From this? That night, I left the house, but I didn't go to the police. Something told me this wasn't just about them. Something bigger was behind it. Something organized. Something dangerous. I took the notebook to a private investigator, paid in cash, told him to dig quietly. The next week, his office burned down. No survivors. That's when I realized I wasn't just stolen. I was taken for a purpose. I changed my identity, cut all contact, moved across the country. But I didn't run out of fear. I ran to prepare. Because if they had been watching me all my life, then I would start watching them. Over the next months, I tracked every person listed in that notebook with a red X, and every person without one. I found patterns, symbols, money transfers. It wasn't just my parents. It was a ring, a system that trafficked children, then reassigned them into carefully crafted lives. Some went to loving families, others didn't. I could have turned it over to the authorities, but I knew corruption ran deeper than the law. So, instead, I became the hunter. One by one, the names on that list began disappearing. Some fled the country. Some checked into psychiatric hospitals. Some were found in their homes. Silent. Motionless. I never left a trace. And when I finally reached the last 2 names, the people who raised me, I didn't show anger or mercy. I showed them the notebook they tried to hide. I told them they didn't deserve a trial. They didn't deserve forgiveness. They didn't deserve to die quickly. Now, the house I grew up in is quiet, abandoned, no lights, no sound, no laughter. But beneath its foundation, they're still there. Just like they kept me locked in their secret, I kept them locked in mine. What I did after discovering a family secret. Part 2. Hunting the ring. After sealing away the 2 people who pretended to be my parents, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel justice. I didn't feel anything at all. Because they weren't the root. They were just branches of something far darker. Their notebook contained 29 names. 29 individuals who played a part in the underground ring that stole children. Some to sell, some to raise, some to mold into something else. I crossed out the first 2. 27 remained, Each name led to a different mask. Doctors, social workers, priests, wealthy couples who smiled politely in public while destroying lives behind closed doors. I didn't rush. I planned. I studied their routines, their weaknesses, their secrets. I blended into their world like I had been trained for it. And maybe I had. Maybe that was the true purpose of my existence. The first was a pediatrician, a respected figure, community hero. He ran a private clinic. After hours, he hosted research gatherings. No records, no photos, no trace. I didn't confront him. I exposed him. One anonymous leak to the media with proof from the notebook, and his empire crumbled overnight. His house was raided, his license revoked, his name dragged across every news channel. But I wasn't satisfied. He would have walked free one day. So I made sure he never reached the courthouse. They found him in his cell, silent, pale, eyes wide open. Not a mark on him. 26. The next one, a woman who ran a children's shelter. She appeared soft-spoken, gentle, until I discovered the hidden basement beneath her property. The walls were carved with names, tiny handprints, scratches. I didn't expose her. I made her disappear. No trace, no witnesses, just gone. 25. Some were harder, some begged, some tried to bargain, some even tried to justify. But I had already made peace with what I had become. I was no longer the stolen child. I was their consequence. Months passed, names vanished. Whispers began circulating online of a ghost, dismantling a network no one dared acknowledge existed. Then, I reached the final page of the notebook. No name, just a symbol, a black ring, encircled by 3 arrows. It wasn't a person, it was an organization, the Root, the ones who orchestrated everything from the shadows. That's when I realized everything I had done so far was just rehearsal. The real war hadn't even begun. So I started building something bigger than revenge, bigger than justice. I started building an army. I contacted others, survivors, adoptees with erased pasts, people who remembered fragments of rooms, restraints, lullabies sung by strangers. They weren't weak. They were waiting for a purpose. Now we share everything. We track every lead, every van, every abandoned clinic, every offshore fund. We map connections the authorities pretend not to see. And when we move, we don't knock. We don't warn. We erase. Because monsters don't fear laws. They fear someone who knows their methods. Someone they created. Someone like me. Part 3. The Final Raid. We had become ghosts. Quiet, careful, precise. Months of mapping, months of scars. Faces that once twitched when someone whispered the symbol. Every vanish we engineered left a clean line in the sand. The ring reacted like anything else hunted. It hid in itself, changed routines, tightened doors. The last lead came from a burned server in a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Bits of code, recovered by someone on our team, pointed to a property registered under a shell company. The address was a compound 2 hours away. Nondescript gates, cameras stitched into trees, a private road that swallowed headlights. We moved at dawn. We didn't move as victims. We moved as something the ring had never expected, as insiders who knew where every camera slept, every guard ate, every blind spot breathed. We slipped past sensors with forged credentials. We neutralized the first watch with a silence that tasted like steel. No alarms, no shouting, just the quiet of people who had rehearsed violence until it felt like breathing. Inside the compound, hallways smelled of disinfectant and old money. Rooms held paperwork that glowed with names and accounts and flights booked to islands with no extradition. There were cells with tiny blankets and drawings in childish script. There were photographs of infants dated and stamped. The scale of the operation hit like a blow, a cathedral of cruelty built stone by deliberate stone. We planted cameras, we burned files, we freed the ones still breathing. And then we found the vault, a door thicker than any bank's, a keypad, a biometric lock, the kind of thing that exists when people intend to keep their sins safe forever. I stood before it with a hand that did not shake. My team watched the corridor. We moved in practiced silence. We bypassed the lock. The vault opened onto a room that smelled like cold metal and old promises. Shelves lined with ledgers, USBs labeled in handwriting that matched the notebook from my childhood. A wall filled with monitors. One screen was live, a mosaic of rooms, other places, other operations, other hands moving. At the center of the room sat a single man. He was older than I had pictured. He wore the ease of a man who had never feared being found. He looked at me as if he'd been waiting. When I stepped forward, the room hummed with the sound of machinery and my own heartbeat. He smiled. "You came," he said. The voice was the kind that had taught men obedience for decades. I didn't say anything. He leaned back, and the smile became something thin and satisfied. "You were always more useful than they told you." My fingers found the first ledger. Names flowed from page to page. Countries, transfers, people who had disappeared, proof. Enough to hang a dozen governments. He watched me. No panic, no pleading. I read aloud the names of officials who had laundered money, police who had looked the other way, doctors who had signed false death reports. The cameras recorded. The feeds we had planted streamed to every journalist we trusted. The world would see everything. He laughed softly. "Exposure is crude. It ruins careers. It doesn't end systems." I slammed the ledger shut. "We end it," I said. His laugh stopped. The man, leader, architect, father of 1,000 stolen lives, tilted his head as if studying a specimen. "You think destroying my assets will end what we built?" he asked. "We are patterns. We survive on human need, for money, for control, for desperate parents. You destroy one ledger and 10 more hands take the job." I felt something in me harden. All the nights, all the faces, all the tiny hands pressed to the walls of that shelter. I tasted the years I had spent changing names into graves. I moved closer. He smirked. Calm. Certain. Then he said the thing that should have broken me. "You were never just stolen. You were chosen." The silence in the vault became a physical thing. I held my breath and the air filled the room. He told a story, not with pity, not with apology, with the precision of a surgeon explaining a case study. Years ago, they had designed a lineage. Children taken, raised, monitored, groomed to be instruments inside the network, to embed, to infiltrate, to eventually lead when the time was right. A cycle to protect itself. He named the architect of the program. He produced a file and slid it across the table. The file had photos from my childhood I had never seen before, not just images, but annotated notes. Habits, responses to stress, rewards, failures. The handwriting circled certain entries and marked them. Potential. Controlled. Air? The final entry read in cold type. Primary subject shows capacity for directed eradication. Recommend cultivation as corrective asset. For a long time, I listened to nothing but the sound of my blood. It was a revelation that should have shattered me. Instead, it felt like an answering echo to every move I had made. every skill I had honed, every silence I had kept. They had been shaping me from the start, not to save me, to make me useful. Anger came in a single hot wave, but beneath it was a quieter, more dangerous feeling. Understanding. He watched me read and then said, "You were raised to know them. That is how you break them." I picked up the ledger again and set it on fire. The room filled with smoke and the man screamed as alarms, finally, began to wail. My team moved with finality. We were not perfect. We were not righteous. We were necessary. We left the vault as the compound burned and the world woke to the files we released. Governments made statements. Arrests were promised. The ring splintered. And then the ledger he had slid across the table did the thing he expected. I opened the last page. It contained a single directive, a line of names that were not victims and not villains, but successors. A program designed for continuity. A list of children across borders, flagged not as property, but as seeds. At the bottom, in that same meticulous handwriting, there was a phrase, "Install corrective asset when available." For the first time since I had found the notebook in my father's office, I felt the role they had written for me laid bare. The man in the vault had been honest in one way. I had been useful. I could hand every file to the authorities and watch the world lecture itself into complacency. I could watch the ring reconstitute in someone else's basement 10 years from now. Or I could do something uglier. I closed the file. I walked out of the compound with a different kind of resolve. The media had their scoops. Politicians made speeches. Some of the names we exposed were taken into custody. Others were simply replaced by new faces with clean records and darker pockets. In the months that followed, we dismantled cells and rerouted funds and protected survivors. We built safe houses and databases and networks. We hid the names of children who needed real sanctuary. I also kept a ledger of my own, not of victims, not of enemies, of people to watch, of systems to break from within. The man in the vault was gone. His empire fractured, but his methods endured in the people he'd touched, in the language of power, in the way institutions could be bent. I began to fill the role they'd designed for me, not because they expected me to, but because I learned the only way to make sure nothing like this ever returned was to stand where it could be rebuilt and make it impossible. I taught others to recognize patterns. I planted truths where falsehoods would later be tried. I turned the ring's own architecture inside out and used it to catch those who would try to replicate it. The ledger I kept was not for vengeance. It was for prevention. It was a map of corridors and weaknesses. It was a quiet, brutal manual to keep predators from thinking they could hide. In the end, I did not become a lord of the same darkness. I became its warden. The last lines of the file from the vault echoed when I finally allowed myself to say them aloud. They had tried to forge a successor to preserve the system. I forged a successor to demolish it. The world slept uneasy. I kept watch. Some nights I stood in the ruins of places we'd burned and listened to the wind move through empty rooms and thought of the children whose drawings had lined those walls. I thought of choices and what they cost me. The ledger on my desk is heavy. It is full of names I protect and names I hunt, and the margin notes I write are small and careful. I do not trust institutions to do the job alone. I learned the truth about my life in a room full of monitors and ledgers, under the eyes of a man who thought he understood how to survive a system. I turned that understanding into a weapon against every hand that would trade another child for convenience. There is no closure that resembles a neat ending. There is only the work. And I have decided to do it. The ring is not gone. It is scarred, thwarted, and hunted. And I am awake. I move in the dark so others can sleep.